The title of the show, Mandala, is seen here in red on the wall. Mandala is a Sanskrit term from this ancient language that was invented by Hindu scholars 3,000 years ago or more. And it's totally artificial. It was based on a spoken language of Prakrit, regularized, analyzed, set down in a fashion so that the notation of sounds of pronunciation were very precise. So precise that they had not been met or equaled until conventions of modern linguistic notation and recording techniques. So these scholars had a liturgical language used for translating texts, and most of the basic religious texts wound up by being written in Sanskrit, and Sanskrit could also be used then, could be read by anyone, and a reading would always have the same pronunciation. So it was based on hearing and acoustics, a real right-hand language in that sense. Chinese is a very different language and different notational system. There the character had the same semine, it had the same meaning, but it could be pronounced 5 kilometers down the road, and it could be pronounced in a way that would be beyond understanding and beyond recognition. But if presented with the character in Chinese, anyone had the language at all, however they pronounced it, would understand the meaning of the character. The pronunciation in Sanskrit was always the same, but the meaning was argued. And so Sanskrit developed into the great language for professors and teachers and philosophers. But it's also a very meticulous language as an abstract notational system for chants, for mantra. Mandala is a visual it's more than just the visual. The term was popularized by Carl Jung, the great compassionate Swiss psychologist who compiled his notes based on actual interview, unlike Freud, who was a theoretician and used other people's written work, not always giving them credit. Carl Jung's insights and knowledge are based on clinical notes with over 30,000 actual patients, many of whom he helped. And one of the keys that he began to understand in this process was dreams, where patients would reveal to him in their dreams, and he recognized that many of these dreams resulted in expressions that he would encourage patients drawing out that were centrally oriented, that involves various aspects of symmetry, sometimes very rigorous, 2 or 3 axials of symmetry, into formal presentations. These he called mandalas, and he popularized the term. In Asia, it's used whether in Hindu ritual or Jain ritual or Buddhist ritual, the various traditions. Mandala always means an offering or a gift, and it usually implies something that, like a three-dimensional sculpture or an n-dimensional, because the mandala goes on and on. If it's centrally oriented, then it can expand to the edges of the universe. The rigorous order is present in pieces like the Kala Chakra, and they're much more casual in the head of Liz Taylor, for example, or the label on a Campbell soup can being considered as a mandala, but that's still a viable context. Here we see below the sign a print of, again, Andy Warhol. There's a lot of Warhol on this wall. This is the pop art wall of the exhibition. These are 4 yellow pansies, and they're framed and matted in a purple or violet color that works very nicely with the color of the wall behind it, and sort of a light green to oscillate against the colored purple. You get the luminous and fluttering effects in the mounting or presentation. Andy gets that in some other work, some of this flowers, these pansies, can be seen as stars. It's a great happy image, like the smile of a happy face almost. And then we see a poster of pepper pot Campbell soup that Irving Bloom used in his first West Coast exhibition of Andy's art in, 1965, I think 65 or 66. And beneath that, on a little shelf, is an actual can of Campbell soup with an authentic signature of Andy Warhol. So there you have a real signature authenticating the work of art, which happens to be a real can of Campbell soup. And on the wall, its iconic image as an Andy Warhol two-dimensional graphic design, popularized in the first of the whole series. He painted almost every kind of Campbell soup I think they made, and in some works has 200 cans of Campbell soup, all with different labels. But this was pepper pot. This was the first one that he did. There's Liz behind, and then some other pieces that fade into the distance. Here behind the altar table, we see the Kala Chakra representation on the left, and the meditating Buddha in the center, behind which is the other gold ground Kala Chakra. And on the right is the still in the gold ground technique of this burnished leaf gold of probably a Bhutanese family, I think living in Bhutan or Nepal, maintain this ancient tradition of workmanship, is another image of the medicine Buddha, the Sanji Menla. But his body now has been reduced to blue hair, so he has lapis lazuli hair, but around him are all the various medicinal plants that are used for curing and healing and treating according to traditional Tibetan medicine. Well, do we call this a Buddhist table, I see, or a Buddhist altar? I suppose they're the same idea. It is an altar. It's not a conventional Buddhist altar, but it has many elements. It has the same essential elements as a Vajrayana Buddhist altar. For a shrine, it has a dorji, which is a ritual implement. It's a symbolic scepter. It's symbolic of dorji in Tibetan means lightning bolt or diamond, and it's a translation of a Sanskrit word vajra, which has the same ambivalence of meaning. It has also a sense of being adamantine or diamond hard, rock hard. And that's this implement in front of a picture of Oscar Ichazo, who is a philosopher, a scholar, a metaphysician of profound order, and the founder of Arika Institute, which is a school in the traditional sense, but a bit different from the exoteric Western university. It's an esoteric tradition, means that these are not big secrets so much as you have to be there and experience them to know what they're about. It's a long, historical, and a rich tradition of esoteric teachings. It's represented by the implements on this altar or table, devotional table. The equal really is a symbol of a connection of the direct transmission, the principle of the direct transmission of the teachings. And that is very close to the sense in which the Vajrayana Buddhists of Tibet use a dorji or ritual implement like that on the altar, together with a bell. Because with the bell, they have a sense of discriminating awareness and skillful means, that you're not only enlightened to the extent that you're aware of the Dharma, of the truth, of the way things are, but you also possess upaya, or skillful means, to actually turn them to some practical consequence towards the enlightenment and happiness of all sentient beings. So the bell is the important balancing element with the dorji, or the equal, as it's called in the Arika school. The bell is compassion and wisdom with the Dorji. In Tibet, the tradition for many thousands of years, presumably, involved the passing on of ritual bones of enlightened lamas, consecrated parts of their bodies to be used in this liturgical sense. So there's a human bone, a skull, and a femur, a thigh bone. The thigh bone has been fashioned into a trumpet that can actually be blown and is blown in performance of religious music. They're a hollowed out human femur. These are not carcasses that are scavenged. These are enlightened lamas who have devoted their physical remains after being exposed to the air in Tibet. I mean, you can't dig a grave in Tibet. You have 10, 12, 14,000 feet, and it's mostly rocky, and there's not much arable soil. So the burial traditions are exposure to the birds of the air who pick the carcasses clean. And in very special cases, I imagine a femur and a skull then is cut to serve as the bowl, like the bell, and the femur like the dorji. So you have the archaic, traditional, shamanic images. One of the great roots of this esoteric teachings are the Mongolian and Paleo-Tibetan shamans and Paleo-Siberian shamanism, where the actual bones are used in the performance of the ritual. The pictures are of some very fascinating human beings whose paths I have crossed in my lifetime. My root lama, in the back on the left, is the Venerable Kalu Rinpoche, one of the great meditation masters and teachers of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism and the Kag-Yudpa tradition. In many traditions, Kalu Rinpoche not only founded a teaching center, a Dharma center, in San Francisco and in many places in Northern California, in Davis, Sacramento, north. He was also the meditation master of pupils such as the present Dalai Lama and other great lamas who studied with Kalu to learn principles and of his deep meditational technique. Great teacher, very great teacher. When he died a number of years ago, he reincarnated. In the tradition of his spirit, his essence, is supposed to have become manifested again in a human being here whose picture is in the front. So he's the second Kalu Rinpoche, the little boy in the front on the left. There he's Kalu number 2, I guess. He was actually discovered or recognized first by one of Kalu's students and a fellow friend of mine for many years, Chuchi Jatso, or Joseph Duane, who was a corporate attorney, very high standard. And he recognized the child visiting Kalu Rinpoche's old monastery in northern India. He says, this is Kalu. I see him. This is our teacher. And there is some healthy skepticism usually in this process. It's not automatically accepted. And the child was observed and given various tests, which he passed, of course. And finally, outside authorities were brought in. The Karmapa was brought in, the head of the order. His pictures are on the right, and authenticated the recognition. Various other incarnate lamas, Rinpoches. The Dalai Lama himself was brought in as an outside expert, a second opinion, as it were, and confirmed the selection. So that's in the tradition of the reincarnations, the spirit of Kalu Rinpoche. There's the young boy. Behind the bell in this picture is framed in gold is a picture of my great teacher, Chonyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the Vajradhara, is a title given to him. Very unique master of crazy wisdom techniques, so-called crazy wisdom. Basic sanity is what they deal with, why they're often regarded as crazy. But Chonyam Trungpa founded Dharma Dhatu centers. There's one in Davis and San Francisco and up and down the coast and around the country, and first in Vermont, and several centers in England, Scotland. He was one of the first 3 young incarnate lamas to escape from Tibet in 1959 after the Chinese invaded. And as a young boy then, he led some 5,000 people over the Himalayas to safety and freedom, refuge in northern India. His center in Karmazong in Colorado, where I did some Buddhist training meditations. Boulder, Colorado is the main center, I suppose. Trungpa, who also died several years ago, I regard as a source of Dzogchen, or direct transmission of teachings. He's also an incarnate Nyingma Lama, as well as being in the Black Hat School. The leader of the Black Hat tradition, the Ka Gyud Pa, is the Karmapa, whose picture is on the right, the 2 incarnations of the Karmapa. In the back is Rangjung Rinpoche Dorje, the 16th Yawa Karmapa. And in the front is a picture of a younger man wearing a black crown, the black hat that characterizes the order, the Kagyupa. And that's the 17th Yawa Karmapa. I haven't met either of the young incarnations yet. They're still in Asia, but I expect glorious travel to America. It's unavoidable, I think, in the future. So I look forward to that very much. So these are my principal teachers, and the other implements there. Let's see what. In front of the femur and the skull in the center is a mala, what's called a mala or a rosary beads. These are actually bone beads too in the tradition of Tibet, probably cut from skulls and then drilled and fashioned into a rosary of 108 Buddhist rosary, 108 beads for reciting various mantra or ritual chants. There's an incense burner. That's an old Chinese antique incense burner with a dragon on its surface, and that was given to me by my dear mother. I regard that as a very important, significant gift. All of this is set upon a table covered with some Thai silks, and then, although it's obscured by the articles on it, is a piece of extraordinary embroidery, really. It, I think, was made as a pillowcase cover originally, but it's a spectacular tradition of embroidery in Nuristan, part of upper Pakistan now, I suppose, where India, Pakistan, and China come together in those valleys. Probably Osama bin Laden is hiding up there somewhere, one of the caves. It's one of the last countries to be brought into the Buddhist fold. In fact, they're very tribal, very remote, and very free-spirited. But they have this extraordinary tradition of very fine, meticulous patterned embroidery. In the center, in a large gold frame, is an image. It is a mandala called the Kala Chakra. The Kala Chakra is like the wheel of time. So it has the 4 directions. The visualization process that goes with this requires concentration and focusing on the image. And then one learns to visualize step by step every detail that's represented in the graphic image here. So it shows an example of a work of art that is very different from what most people in the Western world think of when they see a framed 2-dimensional image that's hanging on the wall. It's not a picture of something so much as a map or a chart. It's also a very beautiful graphic image. The Musée Guimet in Paris owns the original of this image, this Kala Chakra, and they made, as a publicity poster for an exhibition, a this fantastic lithograph of the images. Very hard to tell what the process is unless you get very close to it with a magnifying glass. Then you can see that it's a lithograph and not actually painted on silk as in the original. So for teaching purposes, something like this, where the original is untouchable, it's across the Atlantic and it's already in a museum. So if we don't have the favor of visiting Paris, then we can use this image very high quality, and it serves very well as an image for instructional purposes and for guidance. In fact, you could use this image for ritual practice if you'd been initiated into that routine. On the left, barely able to see here next to the titles, is a box frame of a blue-bodied Buddha who's called Sanjay Menla in Tibetan. He's the medicine Buddha. So this is the color assumed by the Buddha in his function as a healer, as a reliever of suffering, as a teacher specifically directed towards alleviating human suffering. And he does this with means of traditional medicine, with plants and herbs. Facing this, not in this image, is another Sanjay Menla representation, very different, that does include the plants. Here it's just the blue that's described in the sutras and the texts, sacred texts, as being like lapis lazuli. This is a very old image. It's an authentic image. It's painted on silk, and it's so old that the visual quality is very hard to discern. So it's an interesting counter to the problem. Which is the authentic image? The one that you can see in the lithograph, the very high-quality lithograph of the Kala Chakra there in the center, or the real piece of silk with real paint that is so old and been loved for so long that it's almost deteriorated. It takes some imagination to perceive the form of the Buddha there, but it has the authenticity of being the real material object. And it still has barakat, it still has presence. So it's not, I think, a question of choosing between either one, but as a teacher, one uses both and tries to lead students to, anyone who cares about this art or understanding that in terms of themselves, to see both qualities. The image of Shakyamuni, Siddhartha, the Prince of Kapila, the Buddha, the historical Buddha, is seen on the right in a bronze sculpture in a meditational pose, sitting very simply, very quietly, peaceful, introspective. Hands are in a mudra or a gesture of equanimity and tranquility. In fact, this is really a classic pose of inward dependence, of someone who is focused and looking within at the essence. In that sense, manifesting in human form the capacity that each of us have in human form to seek enlightenment and guidance and clarity of mind by independence, by looking at that which is within. And within, of course, we all share the same essential qualities. Our same essence, our humanity is one. It's difficult to pick out the detail in the gold tanka, or hanging scroll, that hangs behind the head and shoulder of the bronze Buddha. But that is another representation of the Kala Chakra. It's a little different pictorial tradition. It's painted on gold ground with very, very fine, sometimes three-haired, sometimes single-haired brushes with exquisite detail. In the center is that same castle-like structure that you can see. It's four square, and then it has four gates in the middle on the other large representation of the Kala Chakra. In the gold ground one, it's just outlined in red paint, and the rest of the imagery is meticulously educed with a burnisher from leaf gold. It's a very ancient tradition, and it's believed practiced, I think, today by Tibetan refugees, largely in Bhutan and living in Nepal, from refugees from historical nation of Tibet, now controlled by. These are various objects from North America, North American tradition related to peyote ritual, basically. The beaded jaguar head on the right is from the Huichol people. There's a wonderful yellow and red diamonds on it. It's a coiled rattlesnake. And then there's another beaded snake. All this is minute beadwork that the Huichols who live in the Sierra Madre in Mexico, in the northern part of the Sierra Madre, around Tepic, back up in the mountains, they carve the base out of wood and then apply beeswax and then the minute decorative patterns on these forms, these extraordinary forms, imagery, derive in part from their ritual celebration through the Eucharist of peyote, Lophophora williamsii, a cactus that only grows in a very limited part of the surface of the planet. It's just as well that peyote doesn't become very popular because there's not very much of it, and it grows in the northern Mexican desert and Big Bend area of Texas, I guess, and that's about it. The Rio Grande Basin, sometimes. As far north as the Kiowas and the Kiowa Apaches, from whom the beadwork of the rattle and the fan derive. These handles, again, are intricately beaded by very different patterns that are handed down by these tribes in the Southwest. There's a waterbird feathers often are used for fan, or hawks, or eagles even. The rattle is from a gourd, Lagenaria gourd, and it has natural desert garnets inside that perform the rattling with some very bright and very plastic-looking feathers in there. But red was a hard color to get with natural dyes, so when the Native Americans of the Southwest saw chemical dyes come into their area, and they did very early, about 1860s, in fact, there were chemical dye makers from Philadelphia who exported red dye. And the Native Americans thought this was just totally fantastic. It was much better than cochineal bugs. They used to get a red color in the blankets by unraveling the bayeta fabric in the Maximilian's Mexican Army jackets after they'd had encounters with the Mexican Army, and they'd remove the jackets from their trophies of war and use that bayeta pink-red color in the weavings of the very early blankets. But then the chemical dyes, like the chemical feathers here, chemically dyed feathers, in the tip of the rattle, became immensely popular. On top of the drum, there's a peyote drum, a ritual peyote drum. It's actually an iron cook pot. So that was another item. That was a very desirable trade item that came in from the east into the Southwest. Native Americans wanted knives and brightly colored beads and yarns, things they could use in their native craft and art. These drums then were strung with hide, in this case a deer hide, and tied in a very intricate traditional pattern to hold the drum head taut. And this would be used as actually a drumstick that you can see just on the left-hand side of the rattle and the drum. Every man would probably go out and carve his own drumstick from a particular stick, perhaps one that he'd seen on one of his meditative visions or trances, and then go out in the desert and know just where to go to pick it up and carve his drumstick. And on top of the surface of the drum is displayed for viewing purposes a necklace like a traditional squash blossom necklace. Only this was done by a Zuni jeweler and has the coral right in the center and three large pieces of beautifully colored turquoise and bear claws. So it's to be worn by someone who thinks he's a bear or has been born into the bear clan. In most of the Pueblo tribes, this would be a clan of your birth determined by your mother's clan. So it's a matrilineal in that sense. I don't know if my mother was a bear or not. I don't know. She didn't have any bears in the backyard. Pet cats seemed to be her favor, but I wear this bear claw necklace on very special occasions, and I must say, hair on my back stands up a bit. The object in the front is a natural specimen of malachite, large green. It's just in the shape of a traditional Vajra implement, one-ended. Anyway, it fits right in the hand, looks like a ceremonial scepter or mace, perhaps. But it's a single piece of malachite, which is a mineral, a copper mineral, and it was found in one of the great sources of malachite, which is Zaire. Malachite was highly praised in the Southwest, though, because turquoise is closely related chemically. It's another copper ore, and mined in Bisbee and other sources. So malachite is frequently found in the same copper deposit sites. So this was formed in a cave into a natural mushroom shape. There's stalk there from which it descended, and then over thousands of years, the gradual dripping of the water in the cave and depositing the copper compounds to form this malachite stone. Really extraordinary specimen that would have been very highly valued by any of the traditions of Native Americans. Above this vitrine displaying the ceremonial peyote objects is a yarn painting. It was also done by the Huichols, the natives who... the Huichols held out against the Mexican federales for a long time up in the Sierra Madre, almost inaccessible in the canyons and steep ravines in the high desert. And they would make ceremonial trips down to San Blas, to the ocean, to say their prayers on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, and to also collect salt, because salt was very scarce up in the desert. And that was the way in 1906, I think, the federal government lay in wait and ambushed a party of Huichols who had come down for their ritual prayers and collection of salt, and by that means secured some temporary and conditional military subjugation of the free-spirited Huichols, who remain in their high desert and are having less and less to do with the outside world by choice, but necessarily involved with anthropologists and art historians and magic visitors. They developed yarn painting, which were one of the first Huichol arts and crafts to become popular in the West from collectors, basically as a way to earn a bit of spare cash and to support their very, very difficult existence. It's set in beeswax again. These are strips of brightly colored yarn that it's the color that draws them. And these are commercial yarns. And it's a medium that was almost unknown until early visitors thought that these decorations could be profitable and sell handicrafts there to the gringos. But the imagery is absolutely authentic. So the yarn paintings all come from the visions that are experienced in a state of trance or deep contemplation or meditation. For which I might say, sometimes the peyote, we have very curious ideas about this, but field anthropologists very clearly understand that these so-called chemical aids or protectors or guides are used in very, very careful and respectful ways, and that lead to deepened insight. There's very little mischief that goes on under the influence of any of these natural occurring substances. Rather, there is open the doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley called it, where one looks within, a closer look and a deeper look and a more intense look at the same imagery that comes to us every night in our dreams, with the capacity to recall that imagery and to set it down to show others. There's the sun, the Nearika, which is the black dot in the rays of the sun, a very characteristic image. Dogs and the animals, the blue deer. In this case, the peyote drum is seen directly below the narika in the center of the yarn painting. There are these blue figures that are aspects of the psyche and of the self that are dancing around. The dots that stream from their heads are the words and the songs and the chants that are coming from out of their mouths. And you see a bowl that's filled with green peyote buttons is sitting. It's being served by two hands with his figure on his knees as an offering. The other peyote altar emblems. In the upper left is a curious element because it also shows another healing plant. Now, a very dangerous plant, a very toxic plant is Datura, Datura stramonium, and many species of Daturas that grow in both the Old World and the New World. It's a dangerous drug and can lead to calamitous results when ingested by inexperienced participants who think that they found a magic trip or something. But the same plant, Datura, has been used ritually in Hindu temples for thousands of years for initiations in certain traditions, in Hindu traditions. So it was used in Afghanistan. I've seen Datura plants alongside the road, and I've asked, this was in the 70s when I was visiting there, doing some ethnobotanical field research, and I noticed the Datura plants. I said, well, what are these plants? How do you use these plants anyway? And they said, oh, that is Iskandarium from Alexander. It's the plant that Alexander the Great brought in. And since then, doing a bit of homework, I've learned that Alexander the Great and his troop, which included also some savants and scholars and philosophers. Alexander the Great, after all, was raised by reading the library that belonged to Aristotle, and before that to Plato. And Alexander brought the teachings of visualization and color that eventually wind up by being combined with the shamanic roots and certainly the Taoist roots of visualization in China and the yogic practices of visualization in India that we see in these other mandalas in the show, together into the Mahayana tradition. It seems to be an overlooked and very important Western root of tradition that Oscar Ichazo, the founder of Eureka School, has done important scholarly work to vindicate this synergy of introspective teachings, the esoteric tradition. Characteristically, the New World Native Americans also have their vision of the interior because, as it turns out, human bodies the world over are pretty much the same. And while we have different cultures and different languages, on the level of the archetypal imagery that speak to us directly without concepts and without words, all these words that I'm adding to these images ultimately are totally unnecessary for every piece that's in this show. One can come in, young or old, a child, or illiterate or literate. Most of the people in the world are still illiterate. They can come in and see any piece here and at least have the possibility of a direct experience. It depends upon receptivity. Receptivity is the key. But one cannot look at this Huichol yarn painting, I think, and focus on the black dot in the Nyarika and absorb in your brain pan the visual imagery of this scene, and then close your eyes and not see something magic, and not experience within some deeper understanding and recognition of the essential nature of the unity. We see here two examples of works from Japan, from Japanese tradition. One very old wood block print showing a bowmaster in his shop on the side of a street in ancient Japan. Woodblock prints have a venerable tradition in Japan, usually involving the collaboration of three artists. There has to be a sumi painter, one who paints the image very delicately with sumi ink, who grinds the ink and prepares the brush and draws the image to be represented. The second master craftsman carves the wood block, or the various blocks, several blocks. And the third master artist is the true alchemist. He grinds the paints and the pigments and does the actual printing. And it's only with the collaboration of all three that these conventional wood blocks, traditional wood blocks, come into being. The bowmaster at this time, before the importation of the gun in Kamakura, Japan, the longbow was at the leading edge of the military technology of the day. So here we see a scene when a samurai has come to buy some new longbows for him and for his henchmen. He has three people in his gang, and they've come to see the master craftsman, the bowmaster, who's seen in the center. He's testing a new bow. This would be comparable to the research and development at the Pentagon, I suppose, today, or astrophysicists preparing Star Wars. Well, let's see, that's pretty imaginary. Or the bunker buster bomb builders, those boys, or something, who are really at what technology you can do. Well, in those days in Japan, it was a long bow, so who wanted to get into a fight with a samurai swordsman? You know, he put an arrow through his heart from half a block away, and no problem. In fact, I think they made a movie with, who was it? Indiana Jones, who pulled out a gun and did it. It's something like that, very ironic. The gun didn't last that long in Japan. The samurai thought it was a bad idea and did away with the gun after about 100 years. But the bows were made in a Mongolian fashion. There's a double curve to the bow to get a maximum tension and distance from it and accuracy. But it was made with laminated bamboo. So this craft of lamination provided the enormous strength and plasticity and response that was necessary for this bow. They're still used in traditional Zen archery practices in Japan, whereas the English bow is made out of the yew tree, the sacred yew tree, the tree of death, appropriately enough. In front, we see almost contemporary pot. This is from the late master potter Hamada, who was a great teacher and friend also of Bernard Leach, who together they reinvented studio pottery for the Western world. Had major impact from Bernard Leach and his school in St. Ives, Cornwall, and Hamada in Japan. I met the master in New Zealand. My first teaching assignment was at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, which has had a very vigorous tradition of native pottery and ceramics. I was very fortunate to come across some local masters there who had the great honor and privilege of honoring the great Hamada to come give a workshop session and tour. He made this pot upon conclusion of that workshop, and I'm the fortunate recipient of it. In front, you see in his calligraphy an inscription. This is very characteristic. Japanese potters that make a pot worthy of the box, then they make the box to enclose the pot in. And that's the pot. It shows tape and some scratches and markings, but this is supposed to add to it, eventually gaining a quality of what in Japanese is known as a wabi-sabi. A wabi-sabi is like the old fence in your backyard that has aged and acquires some character and quality and depth, almost the karmic experience of the wood itself. The inscription in Hamada's calligraphic hand describes objectively the tools that are used for imprinting there are stamps that are made in a pattern in various parts of the pot, and also the yellow glaze, and then what is not really a signature, sort of a characteristic mark. Hamada never signed his pots, so if one picks up And the underside, which you're not encouraged to do in visiting the show, but it has a swirl pattern, but there is no chop or no character or signature. And that, curiously enough, speaks to its authenticity. We're a connoisseur to come across this, but I know because Hamada gave it to me. So that's the direct transmission. The question about authenticity of the pot is not an idle one. It's certainly one that art historians have to deal with on the level of connoisseurship first, to see whether or not these grand and glorious words they're spewing forth about the works of art are indeed about an authentic work of art or the particular one in question. But the intricacies and the subtleties of this for a creative artist were something that Marcel Duchamp, the great French-American artist of the 20th century, and great impulse for many pieces in this show, Duchamp concerned himself with this issue of authenticity and with the value of the signature itself, and how in some contexts how meaningless it was. He's reputed to have signed a mural in a coffee shop in New York and claimed it as his own. So this whole question about who's the artist? I mean, the artist makes the thing, makes the gesture, and puts it out there, but as Duchamp says, you have to have a receptivity, you have to have somebody who picks it up and makes it her own or his. Masami Teraoka is a contemporary artist who has successfully bridged the Pacific Ocean in uniting traditional Japanese woodblock technique and imagery to combine with a pop subject matter and a wild personal characteristic style. Here, a Japanese woman is shown engaging an ice cream cone, a typical product of Western technology and diet. Teraoka did a series of 31 flavors and Japanese women, which he lifted out of the pictorial tradition of the ukiyo-e, the floating world, the great 19th century Japanese woodblock representations of nightlife and high life in Tokyo and Kyoto, other Japanese cities. His playfulness is counterbalanced by the image in the background, which is a rather startling and very, very powerful graphic image that's produced by Michael Morris from Vancouver, Canada in the 60s. It's a poster for an exhibition. Michael's included in the bottom part of this poster is several postcards and little pictures from news clippings and other popular sources depicting various assassinations, processes of violence in the Western world, some imagery going back to Hieronymus Bosch and Peter Bruegel, with the name and the dates and the details of the exhibition that are included in what appears to be a barrel of a gun dramatically foreshortened and pointing out at the imaginary viewer. In between is the pot, the great pot by the Japanese master potter Hamada on his wooden box that he made for this particular pot, seen from the side view here. Well, here I am, your resident art historian, now Emeritus professor, I understand. I'm shown in a rather severely formal pose for me, but I see a little grin breaking through there. I'm standing in front of 5 mandalas that are painted as tankas, as hanging scrolls. They're painted on silk, and they're done in this traditional gold ground technique that actually uses gold leaf and gold surfaces that are burnished with and polished sometimes for long periods of time with great intricacy. You can hardly see some of the lines of gold that are spiraling in or out, or figures are formed. And then it's also painted with single hair brushes or triple hair brushes in exquisite detail. And these are all teaching pieces, and the pieces are related topically to the principal image that's on the Kala Chakra mandala, or the yantras that are on the other side of the screen in the show. These are the pieces that take various aspects of that teaching. It was very comprehensive teaching. It's a whole lifelong meditation to view the wheel of time, the Kala Chakra, which is, after all, comparable to our roulette wheel of Marcel Duchamp in Monte Carlo Bonds, that he shows his self-portrait in front of a wheel of time, in that case, a Monte Carlo roulette wheel. Or the classic Wheel of Fortune, the number 10 card in the Major Arcana of the Tarot. Well, all of these are akin to Bhutanese astrological projection charts, even. And these pieces and views of the world, they're characters being sucked down into hell, like the days of the Last Judgment painting in the Western parts of the little church on Torcello, where a school of Venetian painters would paint the hell beings going down in meticulous detail with torments. Peter Bruegel, Van Eyck has a diptych in the Metropolitan in New York that shows the souls that are swept up into heaven, ascended, translated into the skies of blessedness. And so do these paintings too, while the others, the damned, are sent spiraling down into many lifetimes of icy hells, because in Tibet, of course, hells are icy. If they're warm, that's fine. That keeps you warm during the winters. There are flames for particularly worthy customers, I suppose, but icy hells and water, a lot are drowning. And so there are cataclysmic images left and right. And these are for people who are largely illiterate. So these would be explicated by a lama. Lama in Tibetan means teacher. So a lama has come to mean something akin to a priest, and so it does if you're a member of an order and ordained as a lama. But a lama can be any teacher. There are various titles that are accorded to other lay teachers as well. Here's one of the great images of modern art, obviously by Andy Warhol. Liz Taylor, The White Goddess. She's seen everywhere. And with the characteristic violet eyes and the ruby red lips, this is like Snow White. The classic archetype of the White Goddess is Artemis, the huntress, or Diana, the huntress, the Paleolithic goddess of the hunt. So she's the goddess of life and death. And we need a goddess in that role because she's the rebirth of the spirit of the animal who's slain. So the sacrifice in all of the Paleolithic is the killing of the animal, and the ritual purification that comes before it and after it having to do with that. And the White Goddess is the one who assures that the spirit of that dead animal is then reborn in the next birth cycle, next spring. She comes down in poetry and the arts to us, as Robert Graves has explicated in his marvelous and comprehensive study called The White Goddess, a really classic book of modern scholarship. Robert Graves, poet in his own right, is said to have written that book from memory in 2 weeks, and I think went back and made some emendations and corrections, but the idea of the text is it's a fantastic study, and it gives you lots of insight into the deep history of poetic importance of the White Goddess in all the Celtic languages particularly. She's a goddess in all the Indo-European languages too, but particularly in the Celtic tradition they've retained a relationship to her as Bridget. She's a goddess of springs, a goddess of fresh ideas coming to poets, of bards and olaves, as they were called. And so she becomes a goddess of the alphabet and of letters and of reading. So for university and for teaching purposes in the art department at a state university where this is being shown, she's your queen, ladies and gentlemen. On the State Seal of California, we see her in the guise of Minerva, the Latin name for Athena, or Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who has many qualities of this white goddess preserved with her as a goddess of letters and inspiration. In the exhibition, she's facing the Kala Chakra and the bronze Buddha. And I think that's entirely appropriate. You have different historical parts of the world that now face each other and realize their essential unity. Andy Warhol was a brilliant artist for his eye. He started as a commercial artist, as many people know, and is one of the great innovators of pop art, along with James Rosenquist, Roy Lichtenstein, Klaus Uhlenberg, and others of that school in New York that soon transcended all bounds of school and began to realize that popular imagery in advertising logos and corporate logos and Campbell's soup cans, in fact, provided direct visual impacts on our brain pans, which somehow we transformed or got in touch with at deeper orders of consciousness, whether in meditation, contemplation, or in sleep and dreams. Andy Warhol had the perfect capacity to pick just exactly the right photograph or the right pose. And he did this with, I think this is a still from National Velvet, so it was the very young Elizabeth Taylor, filmed on the golf course at Pebble Beach, actually. In some of the riding scenes, you can see Point Lobos in the background and Carmel Beach. But just the right still at just the right cropping, and not to worry, to work, in fact, with the overprint and the misprint of the various colors in this silk screen. This is an authentic Warhol silk screen. He's signed it in ink. I don't think he dedicated this one, but it's a date, 64, 65, I think, pretty early. And it wasn't terribly expensive in 65, but they've become very precious items. And of course, the same imagery is used as a silk screen on canvas, which then becomes somehow a more authentic or official work of art, certainly a much more expensive work of art. And one such was featured recently in the Museum of Modern Art's exhibition in San Francisco. In fact, I think they used it as one of the picture colors on the catalog that I saw, the monthly newsletter that comes around. This is matted and framed, and a lot of attention has been paid to certain of the objects here in framing because their presentation is so important for teaching purposes. It's a bit of a game, teaching art. I mean, one leads people to it and then makes the horse drink a bit of water. This is all in silver. So in this image, it reflects a lot of the golden light of the Buddhist altar opposites. Here we've got it, folks, silver and gold. Well, here we have a real can of Campbell's soup, signed by a real artist. So there is an inscription there. It's very kindly, Andy, in 1966, I think it was, he came to the West Coast with his rock and roll group, the Velvet Underground, and put on a performance art show on Sunset Strip called The Exploding Plastic Inevitable. And on the occasion, I thought it was a great show, so I invited them to come to my modern art class. I was teaching at UCLA at the time. So Andy came in and showed one of his movies. He showed Vinyl with Gerard Malanga, and then Lou Reed and Nico and the Velvet Underground were there on stage with John Cale, and they all played a set there for my modern art class, so we gave them a double dose of contemporary art. The survivor of that was this can of Campbell's soup that Annie inscribed to me, and then signed it and dated it. So from the problems of what makes a work of art authentic as a teaching piece is a marvelous example. We compare it to the poster that Irving Bloom had of the pepper pot Campbell soup in his first West Coast exhibition of Andy's work. As an advertising poster that was hardly considered a work of art at the time, but has since become a valued collectible item. But that poster wasn't signed, but it's presented as a work of art, a framed two-dimensional image on a wall in an art gallery, and some aestheticians say that that's all you need to consider it a work of art. In fact, that's more than you need. And here, the ordinary can of Campbell's soup, which I don't know, the label has changed several times since then, so maybe a contemporary anthropologist would view this as field data to be collected and study how many times the Campbell's soup label has changed. If anyone doubts it, of course, open it up and try a can of soup. What you see is what you get. What you taste may be more than you bargained for, though. Any exhibition that mentions the name of Marcel Duchamp probably ought to have an image of the Mona Lisa somewhere. This one doesn't have a mustache, as in Duchamp's famous, outrageous piece, 1917. But Marcia Wines, a local artist, has done the Mona Lisa in black on an ironing board, surrounded with black crepe and with spangles. This is a delightful image with a little sense of humor and levity appropriate for Halloween season, but also as adding a bit of humor and levity to the Black Goddess, who is traditionally a witch or a magician or a goddess like the three witches in Macbeth, for example, or Jackie Kennedy in some famous Warhol images of her in grief in Dallas that day is a classic image of the Black Goddess or in mourning at the funeral. The Black Goddess is also the healer and the patroness of herbs and magical healing, as Medea of Jason and Medea's fame was actually the same word from which the term medicine came. As the Black Goddess and the White Goddess are two of the triple goddesses, the other, in the middle, the fertile goddess, is the yellow or golden or red goddess, as she's otherwise known. Here in this show, represented by the four images that Warhol chose of Marilyn Monroe. Who better than Liz Taylor for the White Goddess, Marilyn Monroe for the gold or red goddess, and Jackie Kennedy for the Black Goddess, to sum up the whole period of the latter part of the 20th century in popular American culture. This marvelous image is a big painting, and it's one of the relatively few paintings and works of art in conventional media. This is an acrylic on canvas, on stretcher bars. It's good size. The powerful image of the double rainbow is the key to the mystic source of the inspiration. This is probably, as like the yarn painting, as close to a representation in graphic arts of what a peyote image might be to one person. They're different to everybody. They have a commonality, and that's this a range of luminous color and the rainbow effect and the radiance effect. And here you see a scene that's an archetypal image of the high desert with rather severe but exquisitely beautiful and subtle shadows and purplish colorings and desert mountains. This beautiful sky, soft modulations with immense subtlety played against the great power of the abstract double rainbow image. In the front is a typical high Mojave Desert, really, 29 palms, Joshua Tree National Monument in the Mojave. Over towards Death Valley, you can see expanses of desert washes like this, or pans. But it's painted by Noble Richardson, who grew up in 29 Palms, is basically a desert rat kid. His father, Ted, was a marvelous photographer, and for many, many years, all the postcards that you'd get of the Joshua Tree in that area and the high desert were probably photographs taken by Ted Richardson. And Noble, his son, developed his eye for framing and developed into a very unique and direct style that's akin to to traditional American primitive painters that show landscape technique, but with this incredible subtlety and eye for color, and then the dramatic presentation. Noel's a crafty artist, though, so if you look very closely in some of the details, it's hard to see photographically, but you can find all kinds of, there's a little roadrunner in there and all kinds of little stuff in the shadows of these desert vegetation. So there's a lot going on there in a painting there. You get the geometry on the one hand and then the natural image with its space and expansiveness, both of which are deeply characteristic of not only peyote and datura visions, but also psychedelic visions that are used by all peoples everywhere, have always sought, at least some members of a community have always been charged or felt the call to explore orders of consciousness. They're not necessarily for everybody. And these are the people who were the original artists, the dancers, the singers. We've evolved historically into our socially more acceptable painters and musicians. In this collection of objects, the art historian might consider the question of age. Which one of these objects is the oldest? The obvious choice at first is the little glass object here. That's a beautifully shaped little glass. It's intact. It was excavated. It's a piece of Roman glass from Italy, and it still has traces of luster glaze on the glass. It's a beautiful shape. So that's 2,000 years old. But to the left of that is a hand adze, beautifully fashioned. This is a Maori piece from New Zealand. It's made from a stone called greywacke, and its shape is so subtle and so beautiful. It's balanced in the hand, and it could actually be used as was used as a working tool. In fact, there's a chip out of one side of the edge, but it still holds a very, very fine edge. Its polish is just gorgeous to the touch and the feel. There are subtle differences of shape and mass in this hand adze. If you look at the transition from the blade to the haft to the holding part of it, there's a shoulder with a subtlety of articulation that's worthy of Constantine Brancusi, possibly the greatest sculptor of the 20th century, and possibly one of the 3 or 4 greatest sculptors of all time. And yet this little hand adze here, there was a marvelous tool. It was a valuable and useful tool. Is an extraordinary piece of is it art or is it craftsmanship? Does that demean it? It's a very great work of art if you look at it from the standpoint of these abstract aesthetic qualities. It is, in fact, one of the best candidates for a ready-made made by traditional artists of any piece in the show. Duchamp would have loved a piece like this and seen it. He loved Brancusi's piece and Brancusi's art. He was a patron and an agent of Brancusi in America. He sold his pieces for him and sent his money. Honestly, he sent all of his money, minus 10%, meticulously accounted for, back to Brancusi. Brancusi trusted him. He wouldn't deal with any art dealers, although they're some of my best friends, I must say. But on from that to the almost Brancusi effect of the walrus tusks here. I mean, there's some nice pieces of sculpture here, but these are natural, well, almost natural. The two walrus tusks, walrus is one of the very few sources of natural ivory. There's walrus tusks, there's elephant tusks, of course, ivory that everyone knows. There are whale teeth. The cetaceans, or toothed whales, have real ivory. That includes the orca, or Orcinus orca, the so-called killer whale, and the sperm whale, toothed whales, and some dolphins have real ivory. Elk teeth are arguably ivory. They were valued as such and stitched onto skin garments by Native Americans. But walrus makes a beautiful ivory. In this case, they're fitted into the bone segment of the walrus's snout. These were originally mounted on a plaque that was fitted with the underjaw of the walrus that still had walrus teeth in it when it was given to me. It was mounted on a very plain shield-shaped plaque and affixed to the wall, so these tusks hung down from the wall. But it was curiously one of the very few victims of a fire in a house where they were stored at the time. There was a bentwood box from the Haida people that had just a touch of fire and a bit of charcoal on it. And this walrus tusk that burned the bottom jaw but didn't discolor any of the tusks. It was originally made and framed by an Inuit fisherman who gave it to a doctor who was on field work and who had saved the life of his son. He pulled it off the wall of his house and he gave it to him in thanks and gratitude for saving his son's life. And this, at some later time, on a different occasion, a far more modest occasion, was given to me. In the process, there had been a chip on the tooth of what would have been the walrus's right tusk, the right flippered tusk, and this had been filled by a dentist with a gold filling. It's a substantial piece of gold that molds the right tip of the tusk, the tip of the right tusk, to the same shape as the tip of the left tusk. So a really remarkable piece of natural work in modern dentistry, I suppose. There's also a skull in the background that's on this little red stand. This is probably from the Oaxaca area, I think from Guerrero, so they have a mixtec tradition. It's a ceramic skull, and I believe it to be an old piece, but it's hard to date things like this unless you know exactly, unless you're there when it comes out of the ground. And if you are, you're not supposed to take them home with you. So this one came as a gift through trade, but that's the best that I can track it down. And it's appropriate for an exhibition that's close to the Day of the Dead, or what we call Halloween. You see one of the folk art figures there riding in a Mexican hot rod with it says HO in Mexico on the spare tire in the trunk, and one of the skeletons taking a little bit lighter, a little more healthy and basically sane attitudes towards death, just as the Tibetan teachings and the Sufi teachings and the wisdom of both the East and the West present death as a natural event in life and nothing to be met with fear and stupidity, but rather to be understood with meditation on acceptance. You prepare yourself for it, so you psychically welcome it with all of your full resources of wisdom and a healthy sense of humor to boot. And every year, our Mexican community, our Mexican-American and Latino community and Native American community participate in enlightening the rest of North Americans as to the true nature of death and how properly to approach it. This is shown particularly in the grimace of the skull figure shown in front. This is a fused glass piece. It's done by a wonderful contemporary local artist who works in many media, but fused glass is one of her chosen mediums. This is Marija Anthony. And there are two figures who are Zapatistas in the back. And these are little dolls that are made in Chiapas, in the most southern state of Mexico, by the native community, who's a Mayan community, who is vying for some order of respect and independence in modern Mexico, and that have been having a struggle for social justice and equality for many years. And this has led to a folk tradition where they make these little dolls wearing their balaclavas, and holding their weapons in different media. The one on the left is larger. It's cloth. It shows his jungle backpack tied around his neck. And the other one is standing at present arms, I guess, and is on a stand like a toy soldier. So the little kids get these and learn their role models for later life, when they're 12 or 14 years old, to participate in Zapatista action for freedom. Above the vitrine is this marvelous, humorous, funny, diabolical skull Looks like he has a cigarette gripped in his teeth. This is a wonderful lithograph done by the Native American artist Fritz Scholder, who actually attended City College or Sac State here many years ago. He very graciously visited on several occasions. He lectured kindly to one of my classes, and then on a later occasion came to the department and gave a workshop in printmaking, and left the Department of Art with some of these for raise a few funds for the activities. This is framed in a color that's like an apple green, that's associated with the tarot colors and the color visualization of the major arcana of the tarot, with number 13, or the so-called death card. It's a death and regeneration card, of course, in the teachings. But this particular color is associated with the gallbladder and associated with visualizing problems and with healing through color in that ancient folk tradition, with precisely that color of green, offset by the other frame and the violet on the walls. The stone lithograph shows great freedom and powerful imagery. And it's that quality of the directness and the very positive statements that most of these work make. They make to your touch, or to your visual sense of the color, or just to the dramatic graphic force, such as this and some of the Warhols. This is a very powerful piece, commanding image, and yet it has sensitivity and a great sense of humor too. Fritz is one of my favorite people. He's a marvelous artist and very kind and generous man. Here displayed, hanging, is a Navajo blanket. Well, it's a blanket woven by one of the women who belongs to a tribe and call themselves Diné, the people, we the people. Navajo is actually a Hopi word, and it means savage. So the corn farmers of the Hopi, when they met up with the roaming, hunting and gathering Navajos at the Baskin-speaking tribe, referred to them as wild people, as savages, because they weren't interested in staying in one spot and watering the corn and harvesting the crops and doing the ritual dances like the kachinas and the kivas. Navajos were wanderers. They're now the largest population of any Native American tribe in America. In the 1800s, they developed weaving to a very fine level indeed. They profited from the importation of merino sheep by the Spaniards, and of course, in the wool of the merino sheep were seeds of cannabis sativa, or marijuana. And probably as hunters and gatherers, they explored with great curiosity how these herbs and these seeds might grow. Cannabis is not native to North America, as the great teacher and best-selling author Andy Weil has written in a wonderful book, early book, Marriage of the Sun and the Moon. Cannabis has been around in the pharmacopoeia for alleviating the suffering of ordinary human beings for over 5,000 years. It's authenticated that long in Chinese records. For example, it's been used in Afghanistan, Central Asia, northern India for probably longer than that. The merino wool is the topic here principally, however, and the Diné cultivated the wool, the crops, tended the flocks, I suppose. You cultivate the cannabis, if you like, and sheared the merino wool, made very fine wool, and wove thick blankets. These are not rugs. Rugs were after 1890s or 1900, Western collectors saw the visual graphics on these extraordinary weavings and said, oh yes, get me some of this, but I need them for rugs, so they were woven much thicker. These are blankets and were used to sleep under and hence to dream under, and the idea that your blanket might in some way affect or condition your dream is a very deep one to ponder. I've slept under this and had some pretty good dreams for a while. It's very unusual in its design. It has a white ground, and you see this figure, this complicated stair-step interlaced pattern of a red background, and then the rabbit bush yellow and the black or dark wool interlaced design, and the white and black interlace with the swastika in the center. It's important to realize that the swastika is a global universal sign. We don't know how it spread, but it's always and everywhere associated originally with the sun. So this is a solar emblem. On this side of the blanket, we see it going out from the center. The way that we've determined, or somebody determined, that it ought to be read, maybe just by convention, is you go out from the center and then, in this case, turn left. On the other side of the blanket, of course, you go out from the center and turn right. So it makes a difference as to whether your rotation is clockwise or counterclockwise. The Muslim pilgrims on the Hajj go to the sacred city, the holy city of Mecca, and circumambulate in a group. Thousands of people circumambulate, go around the Kaaba, the shrine holding a sacred stone, probably a meteorite, built in tradition by Abraham. And they do it in a counterclockwise fashion. The Buddhists, however, if you're circumambulating a temple such as the great surviving mandala-shaped temple at Borobudur in Java, one circumambulates it, keeping the shrine on your right. So they're going around in a clockwise direction. And so for all Buddhist icons or stupas, the architectural monuments or temples, one would circumambulate in a right direction. However, in Tibet, there's a native pre-Buddhist shamanic tradition that is called Bonpo, and there's some pieces here that in the show that reference it, that turn in a counterclockwise tradition. So they use the swastika emblematically, showing both the clockwise and the counterclockwise tradition. For the Navajo, it's much simpler. In a blanket, it depends on which side of your blanket is up and which side is close to your heart. The purple dye is the most interesting. The red is probably an imported aniline dye, probably made by a dye maker in Philadelphia. They're German dye makers who set up shop there and exported to the Southwest. But it's the purple water bugs that are the key design. You see them displayed with little yellow emblems in the center, this sort of zigzag. And they're probably made with a dye from native berries, maybe blackberries or olali berries or something like that. The image is totally striking and unique, and it's a graphic image which on the wall will hold its own with any piece of pop art or almost anything that you can pick from the whole history. This is a tanka, what's called a tanka, or a hanging scroll. It's a Tibetan term for a scroll. It's framed or mounted in silk, can be rolled up. There's a bar on the bottom, and then a silk covering for the painted surface in the center, which can be draped down over it to protect it and to cover it as it's rolled up. Or in certain days when they're doing house cleaning and raising dust, then you cover up your tankas. And displayed by being hung on the wall. It hangs very easily. It also rolls up. And tankas were used as money because they're portable and they're very valuable. You could roll up half a dozen of them in your horse and get out of town fast if you had to, and have something to live on if necessary, which happened from time to time, I suppose, in the Mystic East. This character comes right out of the depths of the Mystic East, all right. He's called a Mahakala. Mahakala tradition are the protectors. They're protectors of the Dharma. The Dharma means the truth, so they're protecting. They're the spirits or representations of a spiritual entity that fiercely guards and protects the authenticity and the truth of the teachings of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, in this case, the Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhists. It's a curious term. Maha means great in Sanskrit, and Kala is a word for dark or black. So it's the great black one or the great dark one. The Mahakalas have a tradition of being shown in dark blue, so sometimes they're very scary figures, many arms and weapons flailing to ward off those who would doubt the truth of the world as it is. In this case, he's a white-bodied Buddha, so how can you have a white-bodied great black one? So there's a bit of an oxymoron there. But he has a particular name called Gampo Karpo, or the great white Mahakala, or the great white protector, the white-skinned one. My root Lama, Kalu Rinpoche, identified this protective deity as the one that hovers over all of Northern California. So should at any time in the future our posterity choose to secede from Southern California, or the rest of the United States for that matter, it would probably be this deity who deserves to be represented, along with the now extinct grizzly bear on our flag of the new republic, as it were. He's sometimes shown in tankas that are painted here in America, with San Francisco. I've seen Gampo Karpo with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, a landscape feature with the Transamerica Pyramid Tower showing his little miniature details in the background. So next time you see a great white one protecting the truth of the matter, if your heart is pure and you follow the true path, you have no fear, and you can enter the temple of the sacred space and not be afraid. On the contrary, for us here in Northern California, Gampo Karpo is precisely that energy that preserves our clarity of mind and our purity of heart. It is, after all, according to the Tibetan teaching, the Tibetans are very practical, earthy people, after all. They have a lot of time to contemplate interior spaces in those long, cold winters, I imagine. But still, just living there is very difficult indeed, as I'm given to understand. And so they keep to earthy matters. And they know from experience handed down over many years and guarded very closely for its clarity, that fear and stupidity are precisely the enemies of most people in the world. And that clarity of mind can be obtained in this lifetime by anyone who clears their mind and looks within with compassion and grace. Okay, here I am. I've taken off my hat, my glasses, and my jacket, and having a pretty good time because we have the show on the wall. And I'm laughing in front of the yellow pansies and the title Mandala and Liz Taylor and the soup cans. And here's a great big arrow of fire coming to me towards my right ear, I see. This is the corner of a diamond-shaped mandala, again painted by Noble Richardson. Noble was one of my first serious art students down at when I was teaching in Los Angeles at UCLA and then for a semester at Sac State, Los Angeles. And Noah was a marvelous friend, has been a friend through the years. He painted this mandala, which actually, in its whole view, shows Mount St. Helena and the four elements. I happen to get the element of fire here coming at me. This show is a great deal of fun to assemble and put together and to put up on the walls. And it gives me a profound pleasure and sense of gratitude to mention a few of the students who participated in the seminar last spring and in other classes that I've taught at CSUS. Michael Azevedo, Lori Lockamy, Camille Curran, Patty Faircamp, Angie Vaughn, Scott Conlon. There are many others who helped us with this show and all the staff. Catherine Terrell, our chairman of department here, was a tremendous support. Dean Sullivan and his staff was supportive all the way through this process. The show's a patchwork quilt in a way. They're things that I've had on the wall or looked at or given to my daughters, lent to my sisters here and there that I've collected and gone through some closets, actually, and had to dust off some of the pieces. But it's a tremendous joy to see them in public, shown in such a beautiful environment. And the whole credit for that, my part was easy. I had little to do with this, but all the credit goes to the students who were so active and worked very hard and did a beautiful job in doing what, in my eye anyway, is a first-rate show. I hope everybody who sees it feels the same way, enjoys it.